They arrived at noon sharp the next day, as if punctuality could cloak their true intentions. My father wore a dark blazer he hadn't dusted off in years, and my mother's heels clicked through my apartment like they were marking territory. Behind them trailed a sharp-faced woman in a navy suit, briefcase in hand, someone they hadn't bothered to warn me about. "This is Miranda Shaw," my mother said coolly. "Our attorney." I raised an eyebrow. "You brought a lawyer to my living room." My father didn't flinch. "We're here to resolve this maturely." Miranda opened her case, sliding a file across my coffee table. "Claire, your parents are requesting a renegotiation of the trust terms, a 50-50 split of the estate, house included." I blinked. "Requesting?" My mother stepped forward. "We're your family, Claire. This wasn't meant to be a battle. Your grandmother. She was manipulated in her final years. She wasn't herself." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It came out bitter, sharp. She wasn't manipulated. She was more lucid than both of you combined. "We raised you," my father cut in. "Paid for everything growing up except college or rent or food half the time." My mother's eyes welled with tears on cue. "Sweetheart, this isn't about money. It's about fairness. You weren't there for the financial pressure, the decisions we had to make after your grandfather passed." I stood and walked to my desk, retrieving the envelope Margaret had left me. I turned slowly and held it out. "She anticipated this," I said. "She knew you'd come." Their faces shifted slightly, my father's jaw tightening, my mother's eyes narrowing just before her tears dried up. I opened the letter and began to read aloud. Her voice echoed through my own. "You have shown responsibility, compassion, and integrity that gives me confidence in your stewardship of this legacy. Your parents may try to manipulate you emotionally. Remember that you owe them nothing. These choices were based on decades of watching their behavior." My mother collapsed into the couch, covering her mouth, my father's face reened. "This is her side of the story. She documented everything," I snapped. "Letters, legal records, witnesses. You can't erase that." Miranda cleared her throat. "We'll be contesting the trust on the grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. If this goes public, Claire, it won't just affect your finances." I narrowed my eyes. "Is that a threat?" My father stepped forward, his voice dropping. "You struggled, Claire. Remember. Sophomore year? The panic attacks, the medication. We have records. That kind of instability. It won't look good if this goes to court." I felt the words hit like a slap. My chest constricted. They weren't just questioning the will. They were questioning me. "You're saying I'm too broken to manage my own life," I whispered. "We're saying," my mother said gently, "you need help and we're willing to offer that if you're willing to meet us halfway." It was masterful, cruel, calculated. Not only was I the daughter they'd ignored, controlled, belittled, now I was also the liability they could discredit. I looked down at the letter in my hands, fingers shaking, not from fear, but from rage. I stood tall. "Get out, Claire." "No. I may have struggled, but I got through it without you, and I will not be gaslit in my own home." Miranda closed her folder without a word. My parents stood stiffly. My mother's tears had vanished. My father gave me one last glare, cold and final. "You'll regret this," he said. "No," I said quietly. "I regret not seeing it sooner." As the door closed behind them, silence filled the room. And for the first time, I let it. Because silence, I realized, wasn't always absence. Sometimes it was freedom. The following weeks blurred into a rhythm of strategy and survival. Daniel and his legal team moved swiftly, compiling everything. Margaret's letters, the notarized trust documents, years of journals. Every page painted the same picture. Intention, clarity, and love. But love alone couldn't win a legal battle. That's when Daniel introduced me to Joe and Ellis. She was your grandmother's closest friend for over 40 years, he explained as we sat in his office one gray afternoon. She's agreed to testify. Joan was sharpied and elegantly dressed, with silver hair tucked into a French twist and a voice that could cut through fog. When she shook my hand, she held it for a second too long. I was there, she said softly. When they begged her for more money. When they called her selfish. When they accused her of turning you against them. You saw it all? I asked. She nodded. Every ugly bit. We began preparing our case in earnest. Depositions, sworn statements, document cataloging. My apartment became a maze of manila folders and highlighters. I barely slept. But in the quiet hours, something unexpected began to stir. It started with a blank page, then a line, then another. My sketch pad returned to life like a dormant heartbeat finding rhythm. I drew feverishly. Portraits twisted with grief. Hands reaching for light through darkness. Silhouettes holding burdens shaped like family trees. It wasn't polished. It wasn't planned. It was honest. And it felt like breathing again. My roommates noticed. One of them, Camille, worked part-time at a small gallery in Brooklyn. You should show these, she said one night, flipping through my raw sketches. They're not finished, I replied, embarrassed. Exactly, she said. Neither are you. She spoke to the gallery owner, and a few days later I stood in a minimalist white room as Diana Cruz examined my work. She said little at first, just moved slowly. From piece to piece, her heels clicking against the floor. Then she turned to me. They're messy, she said. Raw. Furious, human. I swallowed. That's accurate. She smiled. Let's hang them. I blinked. Seriously, I want them up in 2 weeks. The show will run for a month. We'll open the night before your court date. I almost said no. But something in me, a voice I hadn't listened to in a long time, said yes. And so I poured myself into the work. While lawyers organized timelines, I painted pain into color. While Daniel discussed legal precedents, I layered canvases with secrets and shadows. While Joanne rehearsed her testimony, I traced trembling hands in charcoal. By the time the show was ready, I had built an entire collection titled Lineage. Each piece was a chapter, each brushstroke a scream I hadn't let myself release until now. The gallery opening would be intimate, just friends, fellow artists, a few local critics. But it wasn't for them. It was for her and for me. Because no matter what happened in court, this was mine. And they couldn't take it. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not just in temperature, but in tone. Pale walls, dark suits, a silence that pressed against my chest. I sat beside Daniel at the plaintiff's table, hands folded tightly in my lap as my parents sat across the aisle. My mother avoided my gaze. My father looked like he was staring through me. Their attorney began with a statement that tried to sound reasonable. Margaret's declining health, her impulsive generosity, my supposed fragility. It was designed to poke holes, not just in the will, but in me. But Daniel didn't flinch. One by one, he built the wall they could not climb. Medical records from 15 years ago up to Margaret's final year. Everyone signed. By independent neurologists, therapists, physicians. Cognitively sharp. Articulate, fully aware, the documents read. Joan took the stand next, recounting years of conversations. Arguments she'd witnessed between Margaret and my parents. Her voice never wavered. Margaret knew what she was doing. She wasn't manipulated. She was protecting Claire. Then came the journals, the notarized letters, the I'm Claire Morgan, 35, a Brooklyn-based artist, barely scraping by until last month. My parents always said Grandma had nothing left, just debts and memories. But after her death, I found a hidden blue box tucked inside her sewing table. Inside, a letter, some documents, and a lawyer's business card. That one call flipped my entire world upside down. Turns out my parents lied for decades. My grandmother had left behind a $2 million trust solely for me. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, betrayed by those meant to protect you, keep watching. This story is for you. I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside. Pristine hedges, a polished front door, and a driveway always graced by my father's luxury car. But inside, it was all shadows. My mother, Linda, lived for neighborhood approval, adjusting her designer cardigan before stepping out to water the garden if she heard footsteps outside. She wasn't tending to plants, she was tending to perception. My father, Robert, loved to say, "Everything we do is for you," while dropping thousands on country club memberships and handcrafted watches. Our dinners were silent performances. The clinking of forks was louder than conversation. If I asked about my day, my mother would nod absently, more invested in the centerpiece arrangement than in my words. My father only spoke in lectures about discipline, appearances, sacrifice. Especially sacrifice. He repeated the word so often it echoed in my head like a haunting jingle. "You don't know how much we've given up for you," he'd say, placing another imported Scotch bottle in the liquor cabinet. Money was always tight. At least that's what I was told. I wore second-hand clothes to school while my mother paraded in a new cashmere coat. When I asked for art supplies, I got a sharp glance and a lecture about being grateful. But when my father's golf club set went missing a grip, it was replaced within the hour. Love in our household wasn't warm. Bitterness, but with justice. I didn't celebrate with champagne when the court ruled in my favor. Instead, I went to the park, sat on a bench beneath a sycamore tree, and let the wind move through me like a silent hymn. The inheritance wasn't just about money. It never had been. It was about the space. To breathe, to heal, to finally start building something I believed in. That fall, I launched the Margaret Vision Foundation. It began small. A few community grants for high school students pursuing art degrees, supplies for underfunded school programs, and a mentorship network connecting young creatives to professional artists. But word spread, applications poured in. And every time I read a letter from a teenager who saw art as their only escape, I saw echoes of myself. Grandma Margaret had once protected my future. Now I could help protect theirs. Eli Carter entered my life through the Foundation's pilot partnership with a trauma-informed art therapy collective. He was quiet with gentle eyes and paint-stained hands. The kind of person who waited 5 seconds longer than most people before speaking like he needed to make sure the words were true. We met during a joint workshop, guiding students through mixed media storytelling. He watched as I moved between easels, encouraging timid hands to press deeper into the page. "You're good at this," he said afterward, helping me pack up brushes. Not just teaching, seeing I smiled. Maybe it's all the years I spent being unseen. From that moment, something began. Not quickly, not dramatically, but like healing, slow, patient, real. We talked between sessions, then over coffee, then dinners that stretched until dawn. He never asked for the details of my lawsuit, never pried into my family. He just listened when I shared, nodded when I hesitated, and said things like, "You don't have to explain why it still hurts. The wound doesn't need to be visible to be valid." One night he helped me hang new pieces in my studio. As he adjusted the lighting on one canvas, a swirl of gold stitched with red, I told him what it represented. The moment I read Margaret's letter, the moment everything cracked open. "She would have been proud of this," he said softly. I believed him. For the first time in years, I believed someone who wasn't Margaret. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. I still had days when the past clawed at the edges of my peace, when my parents sent passive-aggressive emails about family unity, or my own doubts tried to whisper old lies. But I had built enough strength now to answer back. I had my work. I had the foundation. I had Eli. And I had something deeper than all of it. I had reclaimed the narrative. The real inheritance wasn't just in bank accounts or property deeds. It was in choosing how my story would be told. Exactly 1 year to the day after the court ruling, I stood in the center of a gallery that bore my name on the wall. Not in vanity, but in tribute. The real inheritance opened on a brisk spring evening, the kind where everything feels on the verge of becoming something else. The space buzzed with quiet anticipation. Curators, critics, Former students. Friends. Strangers leaned in to examine the pieces, whispering to each other. Moved not by the technicality of the art, but by the emotion sewn into every stroke. At the center of the exhibit was the final piece, a large canvas framed in deep walnut, spotlighted under soft amber lighting. It was a box, the blue box, painted open, glowing from within, its contents indistinct but radiant. The background was layered in shades of black and slate, textured like storm clouds. And yet from the box poured gold, crimson, and the faintest hint of lavender, my grandmother's perfume. The piece didn't need a title plaque. Everyone felt it. Eli stood quietly beside me, his hand gently grazing mine. "You finally let her speak," he whispered. I nodded. She always did. I just hadn't learned how to translate it. Until now. A cluster of students from the foundation huddled in the corner, pointing and exchanging hushed comments. I recognized one of them instantly. Jasmine Rivera. She was 17, wide-eyed with braids tied back and ink-stained fingertips. One of the first recipients of the Margaret Vision Foundation Scholarship. Her portfolio submission had been raw, emotional, bursting with potential. Over the last year, I'd seen her transform, tentative sketches evolving into bold statements. She caught my eye from across the room. I smiled and walked over. "You made it," she grinned. "Wouldn't miss it for anything." There was a pause, the kind filled with more than just breath. "I got the call," she said, eyes gleaming. "Parsons' full ride." My heart stopped, then lifted. "You're kidding." She shook her head, reaching into her coat pocket to pull out the official letter, still folded like a secret. "They loved the portfolio I did for your foundation showcase. Said it was one of the strongest they'd seen all year." My throat tightened. "You deserve every bit of it," I whispered. Jasmine looked past me toward the glowing painting. I read about the box, she said. "In that article, The Inheritance, Your Story." I followed her gaze. It wasn't just about the money. "I know," she said softly. "It was about being believed in." I held out my hand. She took it, and together, we walked toward the painting. The soft murmur of the gallery dimming around us, as if giving space to something sacred. In that moment, I realized what Margaret had truly left behind. Not a trust, not a house, but the ability to give someone else the feeling she had once given me. The sense that your life, your art, your voice mattered. Legacy wasn't static. It was a relay. And tonight I was passing the flame. Was conditional. My achievements were praised only when they could be shown off. Never when they reflected who I truly was. I learned early that my feelings were inconvenient, something to be tucked away like clutter before guests arrived. My only sanctuary was Grandma Margaret's house, 20 minutes away but galaxies apart. It was small with uneven floorboards and mismatched curtains, but every creak in the wood felt like a song welcoming me home. She didn't ask me to perform. She let me be. She smelled of lavender and old books, always greeted me with a soft, "There's my girl," and somehow in her gaze, I felt seen. She was the only adult who ever asked me what I liked, not what I planned to study or what would make money. We'd spend hours painting together in her sunroom, and I'd forget the heaviness of my real home. She once said, "Art isn't about perfection, Claire. It's about truth." I clung to those words like a life raft. But even in that warmth, something always felt just out of reach. I'd catch her staring out the window with a far away look when she thought I wasn't watching. Sometimes mid-con conversation she'd trail off as if remembering something too painful to voice. I never pushed her. But deep down I sensed she was hiding something. Something about our family she didn't dare say aloud. One summer evening when I was 12, I came back from washing my hands and heard my grandmother and my mother arguing in hushed tones on the porch. I only caught a fragment. Something about keeping things from Claire and not your decision to make. But when I stepped outside, the air changed instantly. My mother smiled too wide too fast. My grandmother rubbed her temple, eyes avoiding mine. Even then, I understood what wasn't said. There were walls in our family, higher than I could climb, secrets too big to be spoken aloud. So, I learned to stay quiet, to draw my emotions instead of speak them. And in the silence of our hollow house, surrounded by a family that cared more about how we looked than how we loved, I began to vanish in plain sight. I was 15 the first time I saw the photo albums. I'd been sent to retrieve some linens from the hallway closet when I opened the wrong cabinet at home. Stacked neatly inside were 3 thick leather-bound books, glossy and heavy. Curious, I flipped through them and felt like I'd stepped into someone else's life. Page after page of vacation photos. In places I'd never heard about. My mother in a wide-brimmed hat on a boat in Santorini. My father sipping champagne on a ski slope in the Alps. Designer clothes, 5-star hotels, private beach resorts, all dated just a few years before I was born. For a family that claimed every penny went to bills and groceries, it didn't add up. I brought one of the albums to my mother. In the kitchen. "When was this?" I asked, pointing to a photo of her holding a glass of wine with a city skyline in the background. Her hand froze mid-chop. She took the album from me quickly, closing it with a sharp snap. "That was a different time," she said, brushing past me. "We don't talk about the past. It's irrelevant." But it wasn't irrelevant. It was a crack in the facade, a clue that the story I'd been told my whole life was curated. After that, I noticed more things. The way my father stiffened when people mentioned the business he once owned. The way my mother carefully avoided questions about our family history at neighborhood events. I began to wonder if the sacrifices they so proudly wore like badges were less noble than they seemed. One weekend at Grandma Margaret's, I finally asked, "Did we used to be rich?" I thought she would laugh it off, but instead she paused mid-pour, the tea kettle shaking slightly in her hand. "We were comfortable," she said carefully. "Your grandfather built something strong, but comfort can be misused." I waited for her to elaborate, but she changed the subject to raspberry tarts. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. Something about her tone had unsettled me. I wandered down the creaky hallway of her old house, intending to get a glass of water when I heard voices. Sharp, low voices from the living room. I stopped at the top of the stairs. "You had no right," my mother hissed. "I have every right," Grandma Margaret said, her voice strained but steady. "You're not entitled to everything just because you carry my name. Don't act like this isn't about control," my father snapped. "You think you're protecting Claire from what?" "From reality." There was silence. And then a softer voice. "My mother's. She's our daughter. You're poisoning her against us." I leaned in, my heart hammering, but the next creak under my foot betrayed me. Silence. "Claire," my grandmother called gently. I didn't answer. I turned and went back to the guest room, climbing under the quilt she'd made for me years ago. My throat burned, and for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I cried. The next morning, everything was normal, or pretending to be. My parents had already left. Grandma made my favorite breakfast and acted as though nothing had happened. But I couldn't unhear the bitterness, the accusation in my mother's voice, the exhaustion in Margaret's. Later that afternoon, as she helped me pack, I asked if we were okay, her and me. She paused, hands on my sweater, and looked at me with tired but loving eyes. "We're more than okay," she said softly. "But just remember, not everyone who says they love you knows how to protect you." Her words didn't make full sense then, but I felt them settle deep into the part of me that had already learned it out. It was in that moment, standing in the bedroom of the only person who made me feel seen, that I realized whatever my parents were hiding, Grandma Margaret knew, and she was trying in her quiet way to shield me from it. But even shields cast shadows. The envelope came on a rainy Wednesday, thin and unassuming, almost lost among junk mail and credit card offers. My fingers trembled as I tore it open, standing in the doorway with wet shoes and a heartbeat that wouldn't slow down. The words blurred from my eyes before I could fully absorb them, but the key phrases jumped off the page. Congratulations, Parsons School of Design, partial scholarship. I sat down on the floor and cried. Parsons wasn't just any school. It was the school. I dreamed of its halls since the day Grandma Margaret brought me a dusty art book from a used bookstore. Pages filled with names I could barely pronounce but felt drawn to. Now it wasn't a dream anymore. It was real, tangible mine. Or so I thought. That evening, I stood in the living room clutching the letter like a lifeline. My father was scrolling through his phone, my mother flipping through a home decor magazine, barely glancing up when I entered. I got in, I blurted. Parsons, they offered me a scholarship. My father's eyes didn't lift. That art school? It's one of the top in the country, I said quickly, stepping closer. They loved my portfolio. I thought maybe you could help with the rest of the tuition. I could work part-time and get loans. We've been over this, Claire, he interrupted. We saved for a state school, for a business degree, something practical. My mother finally set down her magazine. Her eyes cool. Parsons is in New York. Do you even know what rent costs there? I know it's expensive, but then you know we're not wasting money on a fantasy, she snapped. If you want to throw your future away, do it without our help. Her words landed like bricks. My throat tightened. It's not a fantasy, I whispered. It's my future. My father stood folding his arms. Then fund it yourself. But don't come crawling back when it falls apart. I didn't remember leaving the room, just that I was suddenly on the porch, the rain now a steady mist, the letter soggy in my hand. I didn't know what else to do, so I called Grandma. She answered on the second ring. Claire, I got into Parsons, I choked. But they won't help. They said, come to dinner, she said. Gently. Tonight, her voice, always a soft landing. I nodded, forgetting she couldn't see me. When I arrived, the table was already set with her blue porcelain dishes and cloth napkins she only used on holidays. A roast simmered in the oven and the air smelled like rosemary and garlic. She met me at the door, pulled me into a hug. I'm proud of you, she said, holding me tighter than usual. We sat, ate, barely talked. She let me speak when I was ready. I just don't get it, I said finally. Why? Do they hate my dreams so much? She didn't answer right away, then she said. Because they're afraid of what they can't control. I looked down at my plate. I can't afford it. What if? She said softly. I had a small fund, just enough to get you through the first year. I froze. Grandma, that's too much. No, she said. Firm now. Education is the one thing worth spending on, and I see your gift. Claire. I've seen it since you were 5. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. I wanted to believe her. I did. But something inside me, something trained by years of rejection, whispered I didn't deserve it. I'll do whatever it takes to make this work, I said quietly. I know, she replied. But this time, you don't have to do it alone. In that moment, in her kitchen glowing with lamplight, surrounded by the clatter of dishes and the hum of something old and kind, I believed her. And I felt, maybe for the first time, like someone was standing in my corner. The following week moved in slow, suspended time. Grandma Margaret followed through on her offer without fanfare. Just a folded check slipped into an envelope left next to a plate of cookies. Use it wisely, she'd said, as if she were lending me a sweater and not offering the biggest act of faith anyone had ever shown me. I should have been elated. Instead, I carried the weight of it like porcelain in a paper bag. Every step forward felt precarious, like something would crack. The day I told my parents was the day everything shattered. They called me to the living room, both waiting with folded arms and faces already set like wet cement. My mother held a copy of the tuition statement from Parsons. My father tapped it with a single finger. Where did this money come from? He asked, voice low and tight. I swallowed. Grandma helped. Just for the first year. I didn't ask, she offered. My mother stood abruptly. You went behind our backs. You took her money after we told you this wasn't an option. You didn't give me a choice, I said. You told me I was on my own. She's Manipulating you, my mother snapped, just like she always has. I blinked. What are you talking about? My father sighed as if the entire conversation exhausted him more than raising me ever had. You're old enough to know the truth now, your grandmother. She's not the benevolent saint you think she is. My stomach twisted. What does that mean? We had to take her to court, he said flatly. Years ago after your grandfather died. The words hung there, like smoke. I couldn't grasp them. Court. She tried to withhold assets from us, my mother added. Assets that rightfully belonged to your father. She twisted the terms of the estate. Played games with money that wasn't hers to control. I shook my head. That doesn't sound like her. No, my father said sharply. It doesn't sound like the version of her. She showed you, but we fought it. We had to. And you taking money from her now? It's betrayal to your family. I stood frozen, the air gone from my lungs. I didn't know. My mother's eyes glistened, but the tears never fell. Of course you didn't. She made sure of it. She's always been good at dividing people. She's not dividing anyone, I said. But my voice cracked halfway through. She just believed in me. She believed in control, my father snapped. And you walked right into it. They didn't yell. That was the cruelest part. There were no raised voices, no thrown objects, just words polished like daggers, precision-shaped to wound. I left without another word. I walked not knowing where I was going until I stood on Grandma Margaret's porch, hands still trembling. She opened the door and saw my face. They told you, she said softly. I nodded, stepping inside. I didn't want you to carry that, she whispered, placing her hand over mine. It was never your burden. But it's part of who we are, isn't it? I said, looking around the room that once felt like a sanctuary. All these years you were at war and I didn't even know. Her eyes glistened. I wanted you to have one place that felt safe. I sank onto the couch. The familiar quilt folded beside me. They said you tried to steal from them. I protected what your grandfather built, she said, quiet but unwavering. He left something behind for you. I made sure it wasn't lost. I wanted to believe her. I did believe her, but something inside me felt permanently cracked now, like I had pulled back a curtain and found a mirror instead of a window. The family eyed. Tried to piece together in my mind, some version where love could be repaired with time, was gone, and I didn't just feel abandoned anymore. I felt orphaned. The call came just past dawn. I was halfway through brewing coffee when my phone lit up with my mother's name. I knew something was wrong before I even answered. My parents never called early unless it was about control or crisis. It's your grandmother, my mother said, skipping pleasantries. She's had a stroke. She's in the hospital. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered across the floor. I was on the first flight out of JFK within 6 hours. My suitcase barely zipped, my heart pounding, a steady, sick rhythm. The silence between takeoff and landing was unbearable. A vacuum where every worst-case scenario played on repeat in my head. By the time I reached the hospital, Grandma Margaret had been moved out of ICU. She was stable but unresponsive. Machines beeped around her like a distorted lullaby. Her face, once so animated, looked slack on one side. Her hands, the same ones that had guided mine over canvas and sketch pads, now trembled in stillness. She looked so small. I stood there motionless until I heard voices down the hallway. My parents were deep in discussion with the doctor, their tones clipped and businesslike. We need to look into care facilities, my father was saying, preferably local, something affordable, clean. And the house, my mother asked. She hasn't updated her will since the last scare. We should get it listed before it becomes a probate nightmare. She's not dead, I said, my voice sharper than intended. They turned startled. My mother recovered first. Claire, you're here. She's not dead, I repeated. And you're already talking about selling her house? We're being practical, my father replied. Do you know what long-term care costs? She might recover, I argued. With therapy support. Support means money, my mother said, folding her arms. Unless you're volunteering a miracle. I took a breath. Maybe she could stay with me. Just until she's better. My father laughed. Actually laughed. In that shoe box you call an apartment with roommates. I'll make it work. That's not care. That's chaos, my mother said. But then behind me I heard the softest rustle. I turned back to the hospital bed. Grandma Margaret's fingers twitched. I rushed to her side. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, then slowly landed on me. She couldn't speak. Not yet. But when I took her hand, she squeezed weakly, but enough. She looked past me toward my parents in the doorway, and then she looked back at me and nodded. It wasn't much, just a gesture, but it was everything. I turned to my parents. She stays with me. You can't be serious, my father said. She's already agreed, I said, even though it was only half true. But her eyes, the way they found mine, told me enough. She'll need equipment, modifications, medical supervision. My mother snapped. Then I'll learn, I said. Or hire help, whatever it takes. This is emotional, my father said. You're not thinking clearly. No, I said. I'm finally thinking for myself. They stared at me for a long moment. Then, as if in silent agreement, they stepped aside. I packed her things myself 3 days later. Helped the nurses transfer her to a transport van I'd arranged with a small savings and a big credit card limit. When we arrived in New York, I gave her my bedroom and took the couch. My roommates were cautious at first, but surprisingly supportive. We rearranged our tiny apartment, turned the living room into a recovery space. It was cramped, imperfect, and nothing short of a miracle. Every morning I helped her with stretches. Every night I read her poetry. The days were hard, the hours long, but I never questioned it because I knew what she would have done for me because no one else would. As the weeks passed, Grandma Margaret's strength returned in small but steady increments. She couldn't walk without assistance, and her speech remained slurred. But her eyes, her fierce, sharp eyes, were fully awake, and behind them something stirred, something unfinished. One rainy afternoon, as I spooned lentil soup into her bowl, she motioned for my sketch pad lying on the kitchen counter. I handed it over, unsure what she wanted. She flipped to a blank page and, with trembling hands, began to write. Your grandfather, she scribbled slowly, built everything from nothing. I paused. The factory? She nodded. I thought it was just small-time manufacturing. She smiled faintly, shaking her head. International contracts, car parts, defense. My spoon hung midair. He sold it, she wrote. Before he died, for millions. I blinked. But where did it go? She didn't write right away. Then slowly, it was supposed to be for the family. 3 trusts. One for your father, one for me, one for you. My skin prickled. Me? She nodded again. You were a baby. I protected yours. I leaned closer. But what happened to Dad's? She looked away, lips trembling. Her next words came slower. Gone. Fast. Lavish secrets. Switzerland. Switzerland. I froze. There was an account. She tapped the page once. Your father found it, used my name, drained it. My breath caught. You knew? She nodded. I fought him quietly. He threatened everything. I couldn't speak. Everything I had suspected, the photo albums, the missing wealth, the coldness in my parents' eyes, it all snapped into focus like a puzzle falling into place. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I whispered. She tapped her temple. You weren't ready. But now you must know. From that day on, she gave me a list. Bookshelf, she'd say one morning, gesturing with weak fingers. Second shelf, black binder, attic trunk, bottom. Drawer, cedar box, under sewing table, blue box. Each item was innocuous alone, but together they painted a portrait of calculated protection. Receipts, letters, photocopies of wire transfers, and journal entries, decades of them. I organized them in binders, labeled each one. Every discovery felt like peeling back a layer of skin on a wound that never healed. My father's name appeared again and again on contracts, flight logs, transaction histories, money shifted across borders, invested and lost, spent and hidden. And yet Margaret had never gone public, never pressed charges. Family, she explained in a whisper one night. It was always family. But they betrayed you, I said. Her eyes filled, but she smiled. And still, I protected what mattered. Then one evening, as the autumn chill crept into our Brooklyn apartment, she said something that changed everything. The journals, she whispered. Back home. Desk drawer bottom. Bring all. That was when I knew this wasn't just a story of lost wealth or broken trust. This was a map, and I was being asked to finish the journey she had started. Grandma Margaret passed away just as the leaves began to fall. It happened in the early morning hours peacefully, the nurses said. I'd fallen asleep beside her bed, still clutching the journal. We'd been reading aloud the night before. When I woke, her chest no longer rose. Her fingers curled around mine had grown still. Grief hit like a silent flood. It didn't scream. It just filled every space inside me until I felt like I was drowning quietly. I flew back to Portland a few days later, not to mourn, but to manage. My parents had taken over the arrangements before I even had a chance to ask. When I arrived at her house, it was no longer hers. Cardboard boxes were stacked by the doorway. Labels scrolled in my mother's sharp handwriting marked estate sale. Donation. Trash. Gone were the sunlit quilts. The watercolor paintings she'd framed with pride. Her craft room, the sanctuary of our Saturdays, was stripped bare. She would have wanted her things to help others, my mother said when I confronted her. No point in letting it all gather dust. I wanted to scream, but my voice felt useless in that space, like a match in a hurricane. Where's her sewing table? I asked instead. My father glanced up. Back bedroom. It's still there. Thought we give it to the church. My heart pounded. I found the table, wedged against the far wall under a pile of unwanted linens. It looked untouched. My hands moved faster than my thoughts, feeling along the underside, searching. And then I felt it. A notch, a groove, a small hidden latch. I pressed and the drawer popped out with a soft click. Inside was a weathered navy blue metal box. My breath caught. It was real. I glanced toward the hallway. Voices floated from the kitchen. My parents discussing reel-to timelines. I opened the box slowly, afraid of what I might find. It wasn't money, not jewelry either. Instead, there were photographs. Letters, photocopies of documents I recognized from the binders at home. And on top, clipped with a rusted paperclip, was a cream-colored business card. Daniel Grant, attorney at law. I turned it over. A handwritten note in Grandma's script stared back at me. Claire, trust him. He knows everything. Beneath the card was a sealed envelope with my name on it. I tucked everything into my bag, heart pounding. Then I grabbed a random bundle of old patterns from the pile to cover the drawer and stepped out. Found something? My mother asked, sipping tea like nothing was collapsing around us. Just some thread and instructions, I said casually. She didn't even blink. We'll be leaving in 20. Don't dawdle. I nodded, but inside, I was miles away. That night, back in my hotel room, I locked the door and laid everything out on the bed. The box, the card, the envelope. I didn't open the letter yet. I just stared at it, hands trembling. Something told me that once I did, everything I thought I knew about my family would be gone, and something else entirely would take its place. I finally opened the envelope sometime after midnight. The room was quiet, except for the distant hum of a vending machine down the hall. My fingers trembled as I peeled back the seal. Inside were several pages, all handwritten in Grandma Margaret's familiar looping script. My dearest Claire, it began. If you're reading this, it means I've gone. And Daniel Grant has done as I asked. Each word was a stitch, pulling together. fragments of truth she had hidden behind gentle smiles and quiet support. She wrote of my grandfather's company, the sale that brought in millions, of how the money was divided into 3 trusts. One for her, one for my father, and one for me. I had been only a toddler then. Your father received his portion at 30, she wrote. He spent it within 5 years. Lavish cars, empty properties, untraceable ventures. I watched helpless as the money vanished. She continued, I could not watch it happen to your share. So I assumed legal control of your trust, making it ironclad, untouchable. Even by me. I paused, eyes wide. I'd spent years scrambling for rent, hustling freelance jobs, believing I had no safety net. Meanwhile, a $2 million trust had existed in my name, carefully protected, invisibly present. There were attempts, she went on. Your parents tried to access it repeatedly. They claimed it was for your education, your needs, but I knew their pattern by then. I documented every encounter. The next pages weren't letters. They were records. Photocopies of legal correspondence, notarized documents showing my name on a trust established over 2 decades ago, financial statements, trust summaries, and restrictions outlined in exacting detail. She had specified conditions for release, half accessible upon her death. Have to be held in investment for 5 more years. My parents were explicitly barred from managing or benefiting from the fund in any form. And then came the journals. Each one was dated, catalogued, and heartbreakingly thorough. Entries from when I was 8. Robert asked again about the trust, claimed Claire's school needed extra support. I said no. He stormed out. From when I was 16, Linda tried to pressure me, accused me of playing favorites, said Claire would never succeed with art. They don't see her. Not truly. From when I was 20. Claire got into Parsons. I sent support quietly. They suspect, but she must not. No. She needs to believe it came from herself until she's ready. My throat tightened as I read. All the anonymous scholarships, the surprise textbook reimbursements, the rent rebate I thought was a clerical error. Every miracle had been her, and every quiet betrayal from my parents, every cold remark masked as tough love had been calculated. A pattern, a cycle. Margaret hadn't just loved me. She had gone to war for me alone. She ended the letter with a final note. You may feel overwhelmed, but you are ready. You have always been stronger than you think. Use this gift to build not just for yourself, but for others. That is how we break legacy and turn it into purpose. Tears blurred the page. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was stunned. Grieving not just her loss, but the layers of manipulation that had shaped my entire life. There was a knock on the door. Room service I didn't order. I ignored it, because in that moment, everything had shifted. And I knew exactly what I had to do next. I reached for Daniel Grant's card. It was time to call the lawyer. Daniel Grant's office didn't look like the kind of place that held life-altering secrets. It was tucked inside a glass high-rise in Midtown Manhattan, quietly polished and meticulously neutral. Leather chairs, dark walnut shelves, modern art that seemed too expensive to feel anything. But the man himself was nothing like the room. Daniel was soft-spoken, white-haired, and had the kind of presence that didn't need raising a voice to command attention. He greeted me like someone who already knew the weight I carried. I've been waiting for your call, Ms. Morgan, he said gently, motioning for me to sit. Your grandmother left very clear instructions. He slid a thick folder across the table. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I was more afraid of what I would find or what it would confirm. It confirmed everything. Margaret established the trust in 1990, shortly after your grandfather passed. Daniel explained. She placed 1/3 of the estate into a private fund under your name. Its current value is just over $2 million. I exhaled sharply. Daniel continued, half of the trust is now available to you immediately. The remaining half must remain invested for a minimum of 5 years as per her instructions. You also inherit the deed to her house in Portland. She specified that your parents were to have no claim, financial or legal, on either the property or the trust. She thought of everything, I murmured, blinking fast. Daniel nodded. Your grandmother was meticulous. He paused, his tone shifting. There's more. She anticipated. Your parents may try to contest the arrangement. In addition to the journals you already possess, she provided legal documentation, notarized medical assessments confirming her mental soundness, and decades of correspondence. The trust is ironclad. I couldn't speak. The weight of it, the care, the planning, the quiet war Margaret had waged to protect me, it sat heavy and holy in my chest. Then my phone buzzed. Mom, we need to talk now. I stared at the screen, then looked at Daniel. I guess they know. I was instructed to notify them once I met with you, he said. I sent the formal notice an hour ago. I answered on the third buzz. Claire, my mother's voice came sharp and clipped like she was holding back a scream. We're coming to New York. You don't have to, I said quietly. Daniels explained everything. We'll see you tomorrow, she said. This isn't over. The line went dead. I sat back in my chair. Daniel didn't look surprised. They'll push, he said calmly. But they can't undo it. That won't stop them from trying, I whispered. No, he agreed. But now you have the truth and the power to stand with it. I left the office that afternoon with the folder clutched tight against my chest. The streets outside felt louder. The city somehow brighter. I walked in a daze, unsure whether to cry or scream or laugh. But as I reached the subway entrance, I knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow my parents were coming, and the past 30 years were coming with them. Trust documents with multiple layers of legal reinforcement. By mid-afternoon, their case was crumbling. The judge leaned forward. Unless the petitioners have clear, compelling evidence to challenge the legality of this trust, I see no reason for this case to proceed. Their lawyer stood. We request time to review further evidence, Your Honor. Denied, the judge said flatly. This trust was prepared with exceptional care and foresight. The court finds no basis for your claims. My chest rose then. Fell, steady for the first time in months. It was over, or so I thought. As we packed up, a woman in a brown cardigan approached Daniel quietly, holding a slim folder. She looked hesitant, like someone who debated showing up until the very last second. I used to work at Portland First Bank, she said. I handled Robert Morgan's accounts back in the early 2000s. I saw something. Then, something I didn't understand until I read about this case in the paper. Daniel flipped through the folder, his brows furrowed, then lifted. He looked at me. Claire, we may have more than closure. Inside the folder were copies of transfer requests bearing Margaret's forged signature. Transfers made from a dormant investment account in my grandfather's name to a shell corporation tied to my father. The forgeries had passed undetected for years. But now, with a witness, time-stamped transaction logs, and matching handwriting samples, it was more than a coincidence. It was fraud, and it was criminal. Within days, Daniel filed a motion to open a new case, one not about inheritance, but embezzlement. I sat in my apartment that night staring at the folder, not out of vengeance, but out of clarity. All my life I had thought the worst thing my father had taken from me was my confidence. But now I saw what he'd taken from everyone. Trust, legacy, truth. And for once I had the power to reclaim it, not with